Hello, my name is Elizabeth Richmond-Garza. I'm a professor in the English department and I direct the program in comparative literature. Longhorn Halloween have asked me to share with you some of my thoughts about where vampires come from. I couldn't resist jumping at the chance. At the very moment, I'm actually reading Dracula with 250 undergraduates. So if you're a big fan of Twilight and you know some of the more recent expressions of vampire craze and vampire fascination, these may be some nice footnotes for you to have in the background. So, where do vampires come from? For many people, although they exist globally, in China, Japan, the earliest references in Gilgamesh, they quite specifically come from South Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Two of the most famous vampires, Erzsébet Báthory, a Hungarian princess who was said to bathe in the blood of young women so as to be able to stay forever young, and Vlad Tepes, or Vlad Dracula, made famous by Bram Stoker, notorious for defeating enemies who should have been able to beat him, and for creating discouraging images of brutality and sadism on the battlefield that ensured his victories, are perhaps the two most famous early named vampires. But it's more than that. If you go back to the late Middle Ages, to folk practices in South Central Slavdom, in northern Italy, even on the border of France and Spain, you'll find there's a preoccupation with what here is titled the gnawing dead, the dead who eat you. If you died in a strange way, were buried unusually, had something curious going on, and suddenly there were people around you who were dying and people who were being harmed, the suspicion was that you were one of the undead, a revenant, and these were not attractive creatures. This is not a prop from a film. This is an actual vampire killing kit filled with all of the technical tools that should help you to defeat the undead. Specialized implements, stakes, holy water, and even a gun for silver bullets. So are vampires real? I don't do real vampires. My husband works on real vampires. I work on the fictional ones. First literary vampire story is written by this chap. He both writes it and stars in it. George Gordon Lord Byron, the English romantic poet, writes the first vampire story in 1819 of the modern sort. This fellow was an actor in London. Henry Irving was his name. He doesn't write a vampire story, but he inspires one. Byron never finishes his vampire story, but his buddy, John Polidori, a medical doctor, finishes it, publishes it, and has great success. Henry Irving is too busy playing Hamlet on stage, and so it's his friend and his manager, Bram Stoker, who writes Dracula. These vampire stories that are literary about attractive vampires, not just the undead who come back and devour the living, started in 1816 as part of a spooky story writing contest. You probably know the most famous outcome of this writing experiment, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein. But Byron created a sketch, largely starring himself, of a vampire who was not only able to destroy people, but able to seduce them. All of them writing in this beautiful villa in the summer in Switzerland, but a summer that because of a volcanic explosion had turned dark and was filled with apocalyptic thunderstorms. Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's always fun to me to think of this rather conservative and proper-looking gentleman producing this terrifying book with its blood red ink on a yellow cover. And yellow covers were used by Victorians for daring books. Second edition, these are all from the Harry Ransom Center at UT, perhaps is more to your taste. It's actually got the vampire climbing up the wall. Based on Stoker, if you read the novel and think about this picture, you'll see that Dracula looks maybe like Vlad Tepes, but actually he looks even more like Henry Irving. If you're interested in experiencing the closest to a real version of this novel that's true to the text, I highly recommend Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula from the late 20th century. What are these novels about? I think they're about the fear of difference and the fear of otherness. Why does the vampire show up? Because immigration might be taking place. These are maps, Victorian maps, showing the threat of Russia, here represented as the Tsar, Nicholas II, here represented as an octopus that's infiltrating and attacking Europe. Overseas was stressful for Victorians, just the way our world is stressful. And giving you only one battle scene here, the charge of the Light Brigade, one of the most famous and perilous experiences of the British Imperial Army, here facing off against the Russians. But at home wasn't entirely reassuring either. Large Victorian cities were increasingly polluted, alienated, That's the neighborhood I used to live in. This is the financial district. And here's just a shopping street. These look a little bit like the Inferno or like hell. James Atkinson Grimshaw, the painter who saw these actual streets, saw them the same way. And the people living on these streets were unrecognizable. They seemed like monsters. Francis Galton uses photography to try to figure out, who are these people I'm living with that I don't know in a big city anymore? How could I tell if they're friend or foe, if they're dangerous or not? And he uses mashup photographs to try to create profiles of who literally looks trustworthy, who looks dangerous. Your face maybe could be a kind of mirror to your soul. Why are people worried about these kinds of folks? Why would you be imagining vampires? There's substantial immigration, a famine in Ireland, and especially the religious persecutions in Eastern Europe, the pogroms. People are arriving to London who are not like us, who do not speak like us, who are not part of what is understood to be traditionally English. When a French graphic designer, Gustave Doré, visits, he actually sees London, the new immigrant neighborhood, as though it was a kind of hell. People have suggested this image might be the basis actually for the designs in the Wachowskis' amazing film, The Matrix, for the human batteries. So why is and how is London the way it is? The left-wing illustrator Tenniel, who actually did the original illustrations for Alice in Wonderland, says the reason London's like this, the reason vampires walk our streets like Jack the Ripper, is because of neglect, poverty, all those difficulties the city is facing. Another satirical magazine called Puck has as its cover an image in which it absolutely stereotypes. The killer must be not one of us, must be one of those new immigrants. The killer must be a kind of vampire. Dracula is written capitalizing on people's fascination. So next time you see Twilight, and we notice that Edward is being sensitive and thoughtful and considerate, even though he's a vampire, that's a very modern version of the vampire story. If you want a vampire story that's more contemporary, and if I dare say it this way, has slightly sharper teeth, I highly recommend Slade's 30 Days of Night, but with a warning. It's as scary as the old ones are, as worried about all the issues to do with safety and being in an anxious modern world as Bram Stoker's, as George Gordon, Lord Byron's, and all the other vampire stories were until we domesticated them and used them for entertainment. So I wish everyone a happy Halloween. Be safe, enjoy.